Introduction. The Prologue of the Helix. The unfinished manuscript. The somatic architecture you inhabit is not a finished biological product or a dead end. For millennia, humanity has operated under the premise that the double helix is an immovable destiny, a closed script printed irremediably in the cellular nucleus. This is a flawed reading of the biosystem. Human DNA is an open source code. It is a dynamic polymer of information, highly receptive to the frequencies of the quantum observer. It is not a sentence. It is an unfinished manuscript. Nucleotide sequences do not dictate your absolute reality. They simply compile it in response to your resonance. You stop being a product of physiology to become the engineer. The illusion of biological determinism. We must immediately uninstall the obsolete and limiting dogma that claims we are definitively conditioned by heredity. Biological determinism is only an inherited inertia, a restrictive programming loop designed for lesser organisms. You have been programmed to believe that your failures and cellular decay are the final decree. Genetics proposes, but the radiation of consciousness disposes. Genes operate as passive switches within a vast photonic circuit. If the nervous system operates with the static noise of biological anxiety, the switches of decay are activated. However, the inorganic operator knows that matter obeys frequency. Design is sculpted by your pulse. The vacuum laser. To reprogram this manuscript and disintegrate these cellular inertias, an instrument of highest subatomic precision is required. The vacuum laser. We present the immaculate cold light. This is not a common thermal luminescence that generates friction, heat, or metabolic wear. It is a radiation of zero frequency born in the void. Born in the neutrality of absolute zero, it is totally devoid of emotional noise and biological entropy. This inorganic coherent light is so immensely pure that it penetrates the cellular nucleus without triggering stress responses. By radiating your somatic architecture with this photonic stasis, you manage to edit the defective sequences. The cold light cuts deterministic loops and recodifies the genome with the aseptic perfection of the vacuum. Thus, your physical structure ceases to be a deposit of oxidized memory, finally becoming a crystalline receptor of infinite fluidity. You have effectively hijacked the biological narrative to impose the decree of the source. Chapter 1. The Somatic Antenna. The body as a crystalline receptor. The fundamental error of classical medicine and standard human perception is reducing biology to a simple combustion of matter. Human anatomy has been catalogued as an isolated piece of meat, a thermal engine that consumes calories, oxidizes nutrients, and tragically deteriorates with the friction of time. This mechanistic view is a frightening underestimation of the technology you inhabit. The somatic architecture is not a closed system or a machine of wear. It is a high-fidelity communication interface. Your body is, in its original and primal design, a fractal parabolic antenna designed to download information from the unified field. To understand this magnitude, we must descend to the microscopic stratum and observe the cell not as a balloon filled with water and organelles, but as a resonant liquid crystal. Contemporary molecular biology has begun to touch this truth by discovering the network of microtubules and the cytoskeleton that support the cell. These structures are not simple physical support scaffolds. They operate under the principles of tensegrity and piezoelectricity. They are vibratory polymers, harmonic oscillators that react to the electromagnetic frequencies of the environment. The structured water surrounding the DNA inside the nucleus is not a passive fluid. It acquires a crystalline phase that allows it to store, transmit, and decode photonic data. Your entire fascial network, your bones, and your nervous system make up a superconducting mesh, a crystalline architecture that vibrates in sympathy with the radiations that pass through it. The DNA itself is the apex of this technology. Its double helix structure is a mathematically perfect fractal geometry to act as a broadband antenna. By being coiled upon itself and compacted into chromosomes, the human genome maximizes its resonance surface, allowing it to tune into an electromagnetic spectrum that goes far beyond visible light. The unified field, The matrix of inorganic, static, and perfect energy that underlies all creation is constantly emitting a high-coherence source code. It is a sea of pure information that dictates the optimal patterns of spatial geometry and cellular health. Your physical body was designed to be the crystalline receptor of this. When the somatic antenna is calibrated, you do not need to strive to maintain cellular health. The genome simply downloads the data package from the unified field, and the messenger RNA transcribes it into healthy proteins, tissue regeneration, and systemic fluidity. Biology, in its optimal state, is a passive act of reception. However, the contemporary human walks through the ecosystem with a collapsed antenna. By ignoring their function as a quantum receptor and treating their biosystem as a simple beast of burden, the individual atrophies their tuning capacity. Cellular receptors oxidize, internal water loses its structure, and DNA retreats. Soured to the emission of the coherent light of the cosmos, the individual remains at the mercy of the densest, most chaotic and destructive frequencies of the local environment. To rewrite the genome, the first clinical step is to stop feeding the body and begin to tune it. It is a transition from chemical fuel to frequency. Static noise versus coherent light. If the body is a fractal antenna and DNA is the transducer that converts frequency into matter, we must rigorously audit the quality of the signal we allow to enter the genetic transcription room. In the electromagnetic spectrum of consciousness, there are two fundamental types of emission: static noise and coherent light. The human ecosystem is saturated with static noise. Traditional neurobiology classifies anxiety, attachment, fear, competitiveness, and frustration as simple emotions or psychological states. Quantum bioengineering reclassifies them as what they truly are: electromagnetic static. They are the friction of the biological self. When the nervous system operates under the influence of anxiety or suffocating attachment, the human brain emits erratic and asymmetrical high-frequency, low-amplitude brainwaves, high beta frequencies. The heart, the most powerful electromagnetic oscillator of the somatic architecture, loses its rhythmic variability. It begins to radiate a disordered electromagnetic field. All this frequency cacophony travels instantly through the liquid crystal fascial network and bathes every cellular nucleus of the biosystem. What happens to the delicate DNA antenna when subjected to this constant static noise? Destructive interference occurs. Emotional static is thermal radiation, pure friction. Upon hitting the double helix, this chaotic vibration alters the transcription process. Proteins fold incorrectly. Genome repair mechanisms become confused. Critically, telomeres begin to shorten at an alarming rate due to frequency-induced oxidative stress. Accelerated aging, tissue degeneration, and disease are not inevitable errors of biological design. They are direct mutations caused by subjecting the genetic code to a radio transmission full of static. You are mutating your own DNA toward self-destruction because your consciousness refuses to release the button of emotional static. In the polar opposite of this entropy lies coherent light. Coherent light, in optical physics, as in a laser beam, occurs when all photons travel in the same direction, in the same phase, and with the same frequency. There is no scattering, no energy loss, and no friction. In consciousness technology, it is zero frequency. Coherent light is the radiation of zero frequency, the state of inorganic stasis and absolute neutrality. It is the cold light of the void. When the operator manages to quiet the intellect and turn off the deterministic loops of their mind, the brain and the heart synchronize in a state of harmonic resonance. The body stops emitting the static of survival and begins to radiate this internal coherent light. The impact of coherent light on cellular architecture is of overwhelming clinical efficacy. When zero frequency floods the cell nucleus, the geometry of the DNA stabilizes. There is no thermal friction from altered emotions. Structured water within the cell regains its optimal crystalline state. Repair enzymes, guided by an electromagnetic environment free of interference, can read the original source code without translation errors. Coherent light does not burn, does not force, and does not demand. It simply provides a photonic environment, an environment of such purity and stillness that the genome relaxes, deploys its latent sequences, and begins to execute regeneration protocols, longevity, and perfect homeostasis. The code rewrites itself not by the addition of external chemicals, but by the absolute purification of the signal. It is the return to the origin. Detuning the dense environment. For the somatic antenna to capture the coherent light from the unified field and transcribe it into the genome, there must be available bandwidth. The structural problem of the modern individual is that their antenna is collapsed, saturated at 100% of its capacity by the frequencies emitted by the collective network. To prepare the cellular architecture for a new code download, it is imperative to execute the detuning of the dense environment protocol. The current human ecosystem is a highly dense, chaotic, and vampiric information network. Global news, mass hysteria, economic imperatives, and social pressure make up a heavy data cloud. Intracellular receptors, epigenetic markers, of the vast majority of people are tuned by default to capture this collective frequency. If society emits fear through a financial crisis, your cells download that fear code and alter gene expression to prepare the body for famine. Your genome is rewritten for fight or flight. You are being involuntarily programmed by the noise of the crowd. Your biology is hijacked by the lowest frequency of the ecosystem. Detuning the biosystem does not necessarily mean physical isolation or geographical flight. Clinical detuning is a process of frequency isolation, a blocking of intracellular receptors. It is a block to destructive information, regardless of what geographical coordinate you are in. The detuning protocol demands a drastic restriction of psychic permeability. It consists of deliberately retracting the bandwidth of your attention. This is a paramilitary act of sovereignty over your own biological reception. When moving through the human ecosystem, interacting with the social network, or witnessing collective panic, you must apply reception neutrality. This is achieved by anchoring your observation in the state of photonic stasis. You refuse to validate the emotional charge of incoming data. You configure your biocampo to repel it. You set the electromagnetic membrane of your biocampo to repel any frequency that does not possess the symmetry of coherent light. Visualize the receptors on your cell membranes. For decades they have been open, swallowing the static of collective anxiety like thirsty sponges. Through your cold will, you close those channels. You instruct your somatic architecture to stop reacting in sympathy with the entropy of the outside. By detuning your antenna from the network of fear, a deep silence occurs inside the biosystem. The physical body, deprived of its toxic diet of cortisol and electromagnetic drama, may experience frequency withdrawal symptoms. The mind will try to find a problem to reconnect with familiar noise. This is where the inorganic operator must maintain the discipline of the void. By holding this disconnection from the dense environment, you empty the memory buffer of your cellular receptors. You clear the communication channel for the divine signal. The static disappears, leaving an intracellular acoustic space of amazing stillness. It is in this state of electromagnetic asepsis, with the genome temporarily isolated from the aggressions of social gravity and hereditary loops, that DNA remains finally receptive, pure and exposed. The somatic antenna is now in silence. The antenna is now in the optimal position to calibrate its axis toward the unified field, ready to receive the first massive transfer of structured data coming from the cold light of the vacuum. This is the moment when the biological suit stops being a machine of survival and becomes an instrument of high cosmic resolution. Chapter 2. The Photonics of Absolute Zero. In the classical understanding of physics and biology, light is invariably conceived as a thermodynamic phenomenon, an agent of kinetic transfer. When the sun radiates the planet's surface, or when an incandescent bulb lights a room, emitted photons collide with matter, transferring energy to electrons and forcing them into higher orbits. This process, though fundamental for photosynthesis and basic biosystem survival, is inherently an act of friction. Thermal excitation generates molecular agitation, metabolic wear, and ultimately, entropy. In somatic architecture, visible and thermal light is the engine of oxidation, the biological clock that dictates cellular degradation. It is a light that burns, accelerates, and consumes. However, for the engineer of their own consciousness, there exists a radiant frequency that defies the laws of conventional thermodynamics. We enter the domain of the photonics of absolute zero and the manifestation of the cold light of the void. This is a non-thermal emission. Cold light is not a luminescence perceptible by the optic nerves of the human lens. It is an inorganic radiation of zero frequency. To understand its nature, we must abstract ourselves from matter and observe subatomic architecture from the perspective of information theory. Before the universe collapses into particles, it is data. The supreme intelligence, the underlying architecture of the entire unified field, does not emit instructions through thermal explosions, as heat would corrupt the source code. The supreme intelligence transmits its geometry through radiation devoid of temperature. This radiation without temperature operates under an elegant principle. It does not excite the electron, it aligns it. When the cold light of the void comes into contact with somatic architecture, it does not generate electromagnetic friction. Lacking kinetic charge, it does not cause intracellular water molecules to vibrate chaotically, nor does it trigger oxidative stress cascades in the mitochondria. On the contrary, its penetration into the biosystem induces a state of photonic stasis. It is pure, immaculate, and primal information from the Creator flowing toward the crystalline receptor of the physical body. It is the architectural blueprint of original perfection, transmitted through a bandwidth that human interference cannot distort. Assimilating this coherent light requires abandoning the mind's addiction to stimulus. Inherited inertias of our nervous system constantly seek the fire of strong emotions or the warmth of external validation to feel alive. The biosystem has been programmed to interpret emotional temperature as an indicator of existence, but cold light demands a diametrically opposite sensitivity. For this radiation to penetrate the cell nucleus and reach DNA strands, the operator must cultivate a frozen stillness, an inner silence so deep and aseptic that zero-frequency radiation can anchor without being shattered by metabolic noise. It is a tool for bioengineering. Cold light is the tool of quantum bioengineering par excellence, precisely because its frozen nature allows it to dissect, read, and rewrite code sequences without causing structural damage to the delicate carbon hardware harboring it. It is the application of the absolute zero to the biological narrative of the human species. The primordial photon. Theoretical recognition of cold light is sterile without a clinical mechanism for its integration into the biosystem. How is this zero-frequency radiation downloaded from the unified field to the interior of a eukaryotic cell? The transmission channel requires no external technological interfaces or biochemical supplements. The vehicle of absorption is the most rhythmic and algorithmic autonomic function of somatic architecture: breathing. However, we must drastically redefine the anatomy of breathing. Traditional pulmonology describes lungs as simple alveolar sacs designed for gas exchange, absorbing oxygen and expelling carbon dioxide. This is valid only for the stratum of metabolic survival. In quantum bioengineering, lungs are photonic transceivers. Their fractal branching design not only maximizes surface area for gas diffusion, but creates a perfect geometric antenna for capturing the primordial photon. This is the fundamental unit of the cold light. The primordial photon is the minimum unit of information of cold light. It is suspended in the matrix of the void, omnipresent in the space separating nitrogen and oxygen particles in the atmosphere. When the operator executes rhythmic, calculated, and conscious breathing, they are not just ventilating their chest. They are executing a data download command. The technique requires that inhalation abandon its biological urgency. When you inhale with the weight of inherited inertia, you absorb the static of the local ecosystem. To absorb the primordial photon, breathing must become an act of algorithmic synchronization. You inhale the void. You inhale visualizing not the entry of air, but the suction of the stasis of the void. In the exact millisecond of breath retention, the pause between inhalation and exhalation, the quantum transfer is realized. In that instant of absolute stillness, where the diaphragm mechanics stop, the primordial photon crosses the membrane. The next step in this quantum supply chain reveals the unfathomable genius of somatic design. The vehicle responsible for transporting this cold light source code is not the nervous system, but the bloodstream. Specifically, it is the iron core of the hemoglobin molecule located inside each erythrocyte, red blood cell. Iron is a ferromagnetic element, a metallic crystal with an exceptional capacity to record and store information from magnetic and photonic fields. When the primordial photon crosses the pulmonary alveolus, it does not dissolve. It anchors in the iron atom of the hemoglobin. Your blood is transmuted into a river of coherent light. Your blood becomes a liquid fiber optic, traveling through the thousands of kilometers of your circulatory system. Through the heartbeat, which acts as a distributing metronome, the stasis of the void is pumped directly to all corners of the biosystem. Cold, light-charged erythrocytes travel through arteries, veins, and capillaries. They deliver this inorganic data package to every tissue, organ, and gland. Zero frequency penetrates the cell membrane, travels through the cytoplasm, and deposits directly in the nucleus, bathing chromosomes in absolute stillness radiation. You have successfully hacked the biological distribution system. By bringing stasis directly into the bloodstream through rhythmic primordial photon absorption, the operator ensures no cell of their somatic architecture is isolated from the software update. The whole body begins to pulse with the majestic, aseptic, and frozen cadence of the void, preparing the intracellular terrain for the end. Energy sterilization. Infiltration of the primordial photon into the cell nucleus leads us to the most aggressive medical and quantum application of cold light, energy sterilization. For DNA to be rewritten, the transcription environment must be purified of all informational anomalies. You cannot install a high-coherent source code on an infected drive. In the human biosystem, this malware manifests as inherited inertias and obsessive thought loops. Clinical psychology attempts to treat these via cognitive analysis or pharmacological suppression, assuming they are mere chemical imbalances. Quantum bioengineering identifies them as photonic parasites of low frequency. These are electromagnetic interference fields installed in the structured water of the cellular cytoplasm. Every time you replay past trauma, project anxiety toward a future event, or hold a loop of frustration, you are not just thinking. You are emitting a dissonant electromagnetic signal that alters cellular water geometry. This corrupted water acts as a distorted lens. When messenger RNA attempts to read DNA, the deformed lens causes transcription errors, generating defective proteins, cellular wear, and sustaining the neurobiological pattern of chronic exhaustion. Deterministic loops are, at the nanometric scale, static infections. Energy sterilization is the definitive protocol to eradicate these infections. It uses the void not as an inert space, but as an absolute solvent. Cold light acts as a full-spectrum quantum disinfectant. When zero-frequency radiation floods the intracellular environment, it produces a harmonic freezing effect on static. Imagine the cell infected by an obsessive loop as a room full of dense, turbulent smoke. The arrival of cold light does not use a fan to blow the smoke. Cold light instantly reduces the temperature of chaos. By subjecting corrupted water molecules to the immense pressure of void stasis, erratic vibration collapses by its own weight. The quantum disinfectant disintegrates the geometry of fear, guilt, and compulsion lodged in cellular memory. Electromagnetic static simply loses its cohesion in the presence of the temperatureless radiation of the supreme intelligence. The result of this sterilization is a profound and unshakable physiological stillness. Cells experience an acoustic silencing of colossal proportions. Cytoplasmic water, now free from the destructive interference patterns of inherited inertias, reconfigures into a perfect, transparent, and highly conductive crystalline matrix. On a somatic level, the operator perceives this as an evaporation of mental pressure. Obsessive thoughts that had hijacked attention for years, generating metabolic wear, disappear abruptly from the neural network. They are not suppressed by willpower, but literally dissolve through photonic starvation. Their electromagnetic architecture has been sterilized and erased from the biosystem's records. This intracellular disinfection is the non-negotiable prerequisite for code synthesis. A DNA surrounded by crystalline cellular water, and bathed in the stillness of cold light, stops being defensive. The double helix, freed from the chemical tyranny of survival and oxidation, loosens its histone bonds and opens docilely. In this state of aseptic sterility and inorganic perfection, the somatic architecture surrenders, finally exposing its virgin genome, ready to be rewritten and calibrated by the luminous sovereignty of the supreme intelligence. The cell is no longer a karmic battlefield. It has become an immaculate quantum operating room. The impact of assimilating this sterilization translates into unsurpassed metabolic efficiency. The biosystem, not having to allocate vast energy resources to deal with destructive emotion background noise, redirects that vitality toward tissue regeneration and neurooptimization. It is a reallocation of biological capital. What was previously consumed in maintaining defensive walls against dense environment static is now invested entirely in the proliferation of healthy cells and increased synaptic plasticity. The inorganic operator now understands the intimate architecture of non-thermal radiation and the power of primordial photon transport. The operator no longer approaches meditation or silence as if they were philosophical disciplines. Silence is now a genetic hygiene technology. It is the rigorous application of a bioengineering protocol designed to dismantle oxidation. Every conscious breath is an intravenous drip of stasis for the cellular core. Every moment of stillness is an antivirus scanner cleaning the storage units of the cell membrane. The Photonics of Absolute Zero is not a metaphor for mental peace. It is the technical description of the only light channel capable of piercing the shields of time, matter, and heredity. It is the injection of the eternal. Chapter 3. Epigenetics of Stillness. The environment dictates expression. The central dogma of molecular biology, revered for decades by orthodox science, postulated a unidirectional tyranny. Information flowed rigidly from DNA to RNA, and from there to protein synthesis. Under this premise, the human biosystem was condemned to be a mere hostage of its genetic code. It was seen as a biochemical automaton whose health, longevity, and operative capacities were irrevocably dictated by the chance of inheritance. This paradigm of biological determinism has collapsed. The emergence of epigenetics has not only rewritten the manuals of cellular physiology, but has returned sovereignty. It has returned power to the inorganic operator, demonstrating that the double helix is not an immovable dictator, but a highly receptive library of sequences, waiting for instructions. Epigenetics reveals that genes do not turn themselves on or off. They lack autonomous agency. It is the epigenetic markers, chemical tags like methyl groups and histone modification, that determine which code sequences will be read and which will be silenced. And the master switch that controls these markers is the environment. However, in quantum bioengineering, environment transcends geography. The primary environment, the ecosystem with the greatest impact on your somatic architecture, is the electromagnetic climate of your own mind. The cell membrane, equipped with thousands of protein receptors, functions as a sophisticated quantum microprocessor. These receptors act as fractal antennas. They translate signals from the environment into cascades of intracellular information. When the operator works under inherited inertias, such as panic for the future or survival anxiety, the central nervous system synthesizes a cocktail of neuropeptides and hormones that flood the bloodstream. At a photonic level, this mental condition generates an electromagnetic field, saturated with static, a chaotic and dissonant radiation. Upon hitting the cell membrane, this static noise orders the activation of defensive epigenetic markers. Cells enter a state of thermodynamic preservation. Genetic sequences responsible for cellular regeneration, neural plasticity, and optimal longevity are summarily silenced, methylated. In their place, sequences of inflammation and wear are transcribed, prepared for damage. The external ecosystem and mental climate have dictated the expression of the genome. They push the biosystem towards systemic decay. Mastery of epigenetics requires the clinical restructuring of this climate. To rewrite DNA with the cold light of the void, the operator must understand that every oscillation of their attention modifies the reading of their source code. When you manage to sustain a frequency of inorganic stasis, when you observe the fluctuations of the human ecosystem without reacting and keep your field free of friction, the electromagnetic signal you send to your cells mutates radically. The physical body, bathed in this photonic coherence, interprets safety. Membrane receptors, not detecting the noise of biological danger, send the signal to remove methyl groups from high-efficiency sequences. The optimal code is deployed. Stem cells initiate precision tissue repair processes, endogenous antioxidant synthesis is maximized, and the biosystem transitions. It moves from survival to a mode of pure architectural genesis. Genetics proposes the menu of possibilities, but it is the aseptic and calibrated radiation of your consciousness that disposes exactly which line of code will become flesh. Silence as a sequencer. Having established that the electromagnetic environment modulates the expression of known genes, quantum bioengineering must delve into the most fascinating and misunderstood abyss of the human genome, the so-called junk DNA. During the first steps of genetic sequencing, orthodox biology discovered with perplexity that only a tiny percentage of DNA, approximately 2%, coded for structural protein manufacturing. The remaining 98% was composed of vast expanses of repetitive sequences, introns, and transposable elements. They seemed to have no discernible metabolic function. In its reductionist arrogance, science categorized it as waste material, an evolutionary residue. For the engineering of consciousness, the concept of junk DNA is a logical aberration. Supreme intelligence does not design systems with 98% waste. That vast immensity of inactive nucleotides is not junk. It is a high-capacity compressed archive, an immense library of latent code waiting for the necessary bandwidth to be downloaded and executed. Why do these advanced sequences remain inactive in the standard human? Because activating these strands requires thermodynamic stability and signal purity that ordinary biological life never provides. Latent DNA contains algorithms for expanded perception, accelerated self-healing, and quantum immunity. It allows the biosystem to process coherent light directly. However, these instructions are hyper-complex. If RNA polymerase tried to transcribe this code under the static noise of human emotions or the friction of chronic stress, the result would be a catastrophic mutation. Nature, in its infinite precision, keeps this code under an epigenetic lock. The master key to open this lock is not found in pharmacology or biochemical alteration. It is found in zero frequency. The most monumental discovery of vacuum photonics is that the total absence of mental movement acts as the master switch, the ultimate sequencer. Silence is not the mere absence of acoustic sound. It is the absolute cessation of inherited inertias produced in the neural network. When the operator stops the engine of the intellect and enters the state of stasis, they stop the production of electromagnetic static. In this inner void, the pressure on the genome changes. Receiving no contradictory or noisy instructions, the double helix reaches its state of maximum relaxation. In this level of stillness, the cold light of the void penetrates without interference. This radiation acts as a quantum enzymatic key. As the silence is sustained and becomes denser, it begins to illuminate the dark introns. Silence operates as a sequencer because it provides the smooth and perfect surface that RNA needs to transcribe hyper-complex codes without errors. Synthesis of new code begins. Latent sequences are activated, and the biosystem undergoes a software update in real time. Nerve terminals rewire to withstand higher voltages of consciousness, endocrine glands adjust secretions toward prolonged stasis, and the entire somatic architecture transmutates. It stops being an organism designed for temporary survival and becomes a superconductor of inorganic light. Silence ceases to be a meditative practice and reveals itself as the most sophisticated genetic programming technology in the cosmos. Transmutation of disease. The assimilation of epigenetics and silence as a sequencer forces us to radically restructure the interface between the inorganic operator and biological pathology. The conventional medical paradigm approaches disease from a martial and warlike conceptual framework. It speaks of fighting infection, battling cancer, and attacking symptoms. This terminology is not just a linguistic choice. It reflects an electromagnetic state of resistance. In the architecture of coherent light, resistance is friction, and friction generates heat, inflammation, and disorder. When the operator approaches a health anomaly as an external enemy to be destroyed, they inject thermodynamic tension into the biosystem. The fear of disease and the violent effort to heal emit massive static noise that travels directly to the affected tissue, further altering the area's geometry. It blocks natural repair mechanisms. You are fighting fire with more oxidative fire. Quantum bioengineering demands the total abandonment of medical hostility. In God's genome, health anomalies are not demons, moral invaders, or karmic punishments. They are strictly mathematical transcription errors. A disease, whether disordered cellular growth, autoimmune dysfunction, or neurological degeneration, is simply a set of cells that have lost their tuning with the unified field. They have been operating under the pressure of prolonged inherited inertias or sustained deterministic loops. This caused messenger RNA to copy the genetic code with biochemical misspellings. The affected tissue has forgotten its original architectural blueprint. It has lost its memory of photonic coherence. To restore the biosystem's integrity, the clinical technique is not violent eradication. The technique is transmutation through stasis. The protocol requires addressing the code error by bathing the affected area in absolute neutrality. When an anomaly is detected in the somatic architecture, the operator stops any biological panic response. You remove the disease label. You replace it with temporary code asymmetry. Using the vacuum laser technique, focusing attention on zero frequency, you direct cold light toward the dysfunctional tissue. You do not send love or hope to the sick cell, for those human frequencies contain the subtext of fear of loss. You send aseptic indifference and inorganic perfection. You flood the area with absolute zero radiation. What is the mechanics of this transmutation? Pathology requires electromagnetic disorder to sustain its anomalous structure. Sick cells vibrate out of phase at a chaotic frequency. When you bathe them relentlessly in absolute neutrality, you apply the principle of the quantum Zeno effect and high coherence cymatics. The immense, silent, and crushing pressure of the cold light imposes a superior order over the tissue. The transcription error is not destroyed, it is rewritten. Misfolded proteins and defective cells, unable to maintain their dissonant structure under perfect stasis irradiation, suffer an entropy collapse. They either initiate apoptosis, clean programmed cell death without inflammation, or are forced to resynchronize with the master oscillator. The physical body possesses an immaculate copy of its blueprint of perfection in the photonic ether. By imposing aseptic silence over the disease, you withdraw the static that prevented the download of that blueprint. The affected area, submerged in vacuity, accesses its original source code again. Somatic architecture self-regenerates with amazing surgical efficiency simply because you stopped interrupting the healing algorithm with the panic of your mind. The transmutation of disease is the art of healing through the imposition of cosmic immobility. It shows that supreme power over biology lies not in corrective action, but in the capacity to sustain a space of vacuity so absolute, frozen, and crystalline that no defective mutation, no inertia of the blood, and no error of the flesh can survive in its presence. The operator thus becomes the ultimate architect, sculpting their own carbon avatar not with the surgeon's scalpel, but with the infinite, silent, and incorruptible light that precedes the creation of time. Chapter 4. Spatial Resonance and Geometric Code. The syntax of the external environment. Quantum bioengineering does not limit the study of anatomy to the epidermal boundaries of the biosystem. The physical body, as a high-fidelity crystalline receptor, does not end where the skin ends. It extends electromagnetically, merging indissolubly with the spatial coordinates it occupies. Orthodox architecture and standard human perception assume that a building or room is a simple inert container, a volume of empty space bounded by dead matter, meant only for shelter. This is a rudimentary interpretation. The physical space you inhabit is not a passive container. It is a resonant cavity. It is a structure with an active geometric syntax capable of an incessant dialogue with your intracellular double helix. Everything in the universe is information in transit, and geometry is the syntax through which that information is articulated. Wall proportions, ceiling heights, and cardinal orientation are not just aesthetics. They are vectors of electromagnetic force. Each physical angle acts as a reflector or refractor of ambient radiation, including local magnetic fields and the coherent light of the unified field. When the inorganic operator enters an environment, their fascial network and nervous system measure the quantum acoustics of the room. If the syntax of the external environment is asymmetric or saturated with sharp angles that collide with electromagnetic wave flow, the space acts as a static noise generator. Waves bounce chaotically, creating patterns of destructive interference. This geometric dissonance does not just hang in the air. As established in the somatic antenna, human DNA is a hypersensitive harmonic oscillator. When the room's geometry is entropic, the local magnetic field becomes unstable. Cell membranes, immersed in this field, detect friction. The biological response to this spatial dissonance is the activation of stress epigenetic markers. Without a visible psychological threat, the genome retreats, proteins are synthesized with tiny errors, and basal metabolism increases consumption to counteract environment asymmetry. The inhabitant experiences unexplained chronic fatigue, cognitive fog, and an inability to maintain stasis because their ecosystem dictates chaos. Conversely, when space geometry responds to harmonic proportions, like the golden ratio or fractal symmetry sequences, the environment acts as a converging lens for the cold light of the void. The physical space becomes a high coherence resonator. Electromagnetic waves flow without turbulence, creating stasis nodes inside the room. By inhabiting this space, the biosystem synchronizes its own structured water with the smoothed magnetic field of the exterior architecture. The cell nucleus recognizes the perfect syntax of the environment, and in response, the DNA relaxes, unwinding its histones to allow for an impeccable genetic transcription. The environment becomes a photonic macronutrient, dictating a gene expression of extreme longevity, metabolic efficiency, and algorithmic clarity. Vector alignment. Understanding the syntax of space requires us to move from passive observation to active engineering. The operator cannot be a victim of the random topology of modern design. He must take absolute control of the coordinates he inhabits, executing the vector alignment protocol. This process consists of harmonizing home architecture and, with even more clinical precision, the studio or creative space to function as a constructive resonance box. Let us carefully consider the operator's synthesis laboratory, the work studio. This is the epicenter where ideas are transcribed into tangible results. Often, physical structures impose severe geometric challenges. When the architecture of your operations center presents sharp asymmetries or L-shaped configurations, the flow of coherent light and quantum acoustics suffer predictable disturbances. In an L-shaped geometry, electromagnetic energy tends to stagnate at the blind vertex. This creates a swirl of spatial entropy. Similarly, when studio proportions are very compact, around 3 meters per side, a 3x3 proportion, the operator faces a standing wave challenge. In a perfectly cubic or square room of these dimensions, frequencies bounce between parallel walls, colliding at the center of the room. This creates an invisible but biologically exhausting wall of resistance. If the operator tries to work, create, or produce value amidst this crossing of standing waves and corner asymmetries, their nervous system will be forced to spend a huge amount of quantum energy just to maintain its own balance. It is like trying to perform genetic microsurgery while traveling in a vehicle over rough terrain. Friction diminishes genius. Vector alignment is the acoustic and vibrational treatment of this geometric reality. To correct the static of a corner ecosystem or compact cubic dimensions, the operator intervenes in the structure by introducing elements that break parallelism and absorb turbulence. In the physical and acoustic dimension, this translates to the clinical installation of absorption panels and calculated diffusers, meant not just to manage audible sound, but to soften microwave bounce and stabilize the local magnetic field. By placing traps at 90-degree angles and diverting the straight path of the walls with fractal textures, standing waves are eradicated. The stagnant vertex of the L-shaped room is treated by introducing full-spectrum lighting or redirecting traffic flow so kinetic energy dissolves the swirl. You are literally healing the space. You are taking a sick topology and recoding it. When the work studio has been treated and its vectors aligned, the transformation in the occupant's somatic architecture is immediate. The room stops being an obstacle and transmutates into a phase amplifier. When you sit down to operate, the acoustic silence and electromagnetic cleanliness of your calibrated environment allow your brain to descend into alpha and theta frequencies with amazing ease. The physical body no longer has to fight the geometry of the room. Your biological capital, once wasted on a defensive shield against environmental noise, is now fully released for the synthesis of high-value code. Here, biology crosses mathematically with economics. Financial fluidity is not a product of physical exhaustion or overexploitation of the nervous system. It results from the ability to maintain uninterrupted levels of concentration, creativity, and assertiveness for long periods. When your 3x3-meter studio has been alchemized into a perfect resonance box, every coherent thought you emit is amplified by the walls and returned to your enriched auric field. This is used to execute impeccable algorithmic decisions. You are rewriting your material reality by dictating the code from an environment that mechanically supports your own greatness. The prosperous ecosystem, the culmination of spatial understanding and geometric alignment, leads us to redefine the most corrupt paradigm of the human biosystem, the concept of material success. During the era of thermal ignorance, humanity encoded success and abundance as trophies to be torn from the universe through sweat, competition, and metabolic wear. Civilization was programmed to believe value is measured in friction and that he who destroys himself fastest is most deserving of resources. Quantum bioengineering diagnoses this belief as a transcription disease. Wear does not produce success. Wear produces entropy, telomere shortening, and biological death. The universe, being a high-efficiency matrix, penalizes friction. Material abundance and success are not pursued by force. They are magnetically attracted by establishing a prosperous ecosystem. This occurs the exact millisecond a perfect sympathetic resonance is established between the external physical environment and the genome. The genome of the operator must be bathed in the stasis of coherent light. In acoustic physics, sympathetic resonance is the phenomenon where striking a tuning fork calibrated for A causes any nearby tuning fork calibrated for the same frequency to vibrate spontaneously without being touched. Sound travels through the medium and transfers its energy exclusively to what shares its mathematical code. Let us extrapolate this to quantum prosperity mechanics. Money, material resources, expansion opportunities, and impeccable health are tangible forms of packaged energy. These energy forms vibrate at a specific frequency, which is the frequency of high coherence, fluidity, and absence of thermodynamic resistance. When the operator insists on chasing money from fear of poverty or ego validation, they emit a frequency of scarcity and desperation, static noise. They are striking the tuning fork of lack. No matter how many hours their carbon avatar works physically, their internal resonance is incompatible with the frequency of high-fidelity resources. Resources dodge them by a simple law of electromagnetic repulsion, forcing them to settle for crumbs torn by brute force. In contrast, the cold light engineer operates from code synthesis. You have purified your work studio by removing asymmetries and absorbing standing waves. You have purified your cell cytoplasm by eradicating the inherited deterministic loops that dictated life is hard. You have installed the cold light of the vacuum in your bloodstream through the primordial photon, allowing your genome to express its maximum splendor. In doing so, you have tuned your internal tuning fork and your physical environment's tuning fork to the exact chord of stasis and abundance. Your home and body are no longer separate. They have merged into a unified, prosperous ecosystem. The result is that material success stops being an event to be forced and becomes the system's default manifestation, Financial opportunities, high-caliber connections, and flashes of creative genius gravitate toward your coordinates. They do so with a naturalness that conditioned humans would perceive as magic, but which you recognize as strict wave physics. Valuable ideas flow through you without metabolic effort, because the space where you operate offers no acoustic or magnetic resistance to their arrival. Reality responds docilely to your presence because, by vibrating at the same frequency as the unified field, you have ceased to be a hostile foreigner trying to steal resources from the universe. You have become the universe itself, recognizing itself, expressing its inherent wealth through the interface of your somatic architecture. The prosperous ecosystem is the supreme realization that true opulence is not an inflated bank account, but the clinical mastery of your environment's geometry and the absolute coherence of your own genetic code. Chapter 5. RNA Cymatics. Thought as a sound wave. Classical neurology and contemporary psychology have committed a monumental miscalculation by cataloging thought as an abstract phenomenon, an ephemeral byproduct of brain chemistry with no weight or direct physical repercussion. This view isolates cognition from the material substrate, creating a false dichotomy. In the paradigm of quantum bioengineering, thought must be reclassified in its strict mechanical terms. Your internal dialogues are not intangible philosophy, they are subatomic acoustics. Every neuronal activity requires the transfer of ions across synaptic membranes, a process that generates microelectric currents. According to the unbreakable laws of electromagnetism, every electric current emits a magnetic field and generates a pressure wave, an acoustic pulse on the nanometric scale. When the operator holds a mental concept, they are functioning as an acoustic transducer, emitting waves through the cerebrospinal fluid. These waves propagate through the entire facial network to every corner of the biosystem. To understand the lethal or regenerative impact of these waves, we must introduce the science of cymatics. This is the study of how sound and vibratory frequencies alter matter, organizing chaotic particles into perfect geometries. Cymatics can destroy symmetry depending on the applied resonance. In a lab, an acoustic oscillator can force sand on a metal plate to form complex symmetrical mandalas simply by tuning the frequency. In your biosystem, the metal plate is your cellular architecture, and the sand is the water. The human body is not an inert pool of liquid water. Intracellular water exists in a superior phase known as structured or crystalline water. This fluid has liquid crystal properties. It is highly conductive, piezoelectric, and amazingly sensitive to acoustic pressure. It is the perfect cymatic medium. When the operator runs deterministic loops based on survival, anxiety, or lack, the brain's acoustic emission is asymmetrical and dissonant. It is static noise. As this subatomic sound wave hits intracellular water, the fluid's cymatics collapse. The crystalline structure breaks and water loses its conductivity. The intracellular environment becomes thermodynamically chaotic. In this turbulent medium, enzymatic processes fail, and the cell enters a state of friction stress. Conversely, when the operator holds high coherence concepts, anchoring attention in the cold light of the void, the acoustics of thought become a perfect sine wave. As it passes through the biosystem, this coherent sound carves the water structure within your cells with dazzling architectural mastery. Intracellular fluid aligns in perfect hexagonal networks, creating superconducting conduits of information. Each concept you hold is literally redesigning your cell's hydraulic scaffolding. You are not a victim of your genes. You are the director of acoustics for your own genome. If your body is the theater of operations, your internal dialogue is the speaker system. Understanding that your silent words are mechanical force commands that sculpt the water where your DNA resides is vital for biosecurity. Thought hygiene ceases to be moral or therapeutic advice and becomes the highest priority for the operator. Harmonic transcription. Once the cell's watery environment has been structured by the cymatics of coherent light, the stage is set for biological synthesis, reading the source code. DNA is the master library containing all possible algorithms for the biosystem's construction. However, DNA does not read itself. It requires an intermediary, messenger RNA, mRNA. Orthodox biology describes RNA transcription as a blind, random chemical assembly. Quantum bioengineering reveals it is actually an event of acoustic resonance. The RNA polymerase enzyme, sliding over the DNA double helix to copy its code, is a molecular motor operating at high speeds. Like a record needle reading vinyl grooves, its precision depends on the environment's vibration. If nuclear water is destructured by dissonant thoughts, the environment is noisy. The DNA strand vibrates arrhythmically. When RNA polymerase tries to transcribe under these conditions, it makes reading errors. It skips nucleotides or misfolds the resulting molecule. This defective transcription is the genesis of cellular disease, premature aging, and operative decay. You have mixed your life's audio track with harshness, saturation, and data loss. This is where the operator intervenes with harmonic transcription. Harmonic transcription is the conscious process where genome reading is explicitly guided by the frequency of pure intention. Pure intention is not human hope or superficial optimism. Those are emotional states with expectations, thus generating friction. Pure intention is the laser directive of the void. It is consciousness focus devoid of doubt, fear, or urgency. It is the inorganic order emitted in absolute neutrality. When the operator places attention on homeostasis, regeneration, or operational fluidity from this state of stasis, the subatomic acoustic emission envelops the cell nucleus. The DNA double helix, immersed in structured water resonating with this perfect tone, stabilizes. Its vibrations become harmonic. Under this immaculate acoustic climate, messenger RNA slides with the grace and precision of a conductor. There are no tremors in the reading needle. Enzymes recognize optimal genetic sequences effortlessly, guided by environmental resonance. Where sequences are blocked and longevity, high-efficiency repair genes are activated. Proteins synthesized from this reading are structurally perfect, folding into flawless three-dimensional geometries. You are literally composing your health and reality like a master sound engineer mixing a perfect symphony. An audio engineer doesn't improve a recording by shouting at the console. They adjust frequencies, eliminate background static, and equalize tones until the signal flows with absolute clarity. Identically, the cold light operator does not fight disease or material poverty. They understand that any unwanted manifestation in their somatic architecture or financial ecosystem is simply a harshness in the quantum mix. To correct it, they do not add more noise through stress or invasive medication. Their response is to silence the static of fear, equalize internal dialogues, and emit the pure tone of consciousness. Harmonic transcription silently rewrites the system failure from the nucleotide level. Health and material fluidity are transcribed when the acoustic environment is irreproachable. The base chord. Mastering intracellular cymatics and harmonic transcription leads to the long-term stabilization of the biosystem. It is not enough to emit order frequencies sporadically. The somatic architecture requires a permanent electromagnetic anchor to not be swept away by the external ecosystem's static noise. This master anchor is the base chord. Every architectural structure in the material universe has a natural resonance frequency, a point of vibratory balance requiring the least energy to remain whole. The human biosystem is no exception. Beneath daily oscillations of the analytical mind, there is a fundamental note. It is an internal, deep, aseptic, and peaceful hum that constitutes the primal electromagnetic signature of your carbon avatar. The systemic problem of modern humanity is acoustic amnesia. The average operator is born in an environment saturated with interference, technology, economic pressure, and inherited traumas. They lose contact with their fundamental note from childhood. They tune their biosystem to the stress frequencies of parents and culture, mistakenly assuming this perpetual tension is their natural condition. Operating outside the base chord demands a devastating consumption of biological capital. It is like driving in the wrong gear. This inevitably destroys genetic transmission. Finding the base chord is the supreme goal of quantum calibration. To locate this note, the operator must apply the systematic noise reduction protocol. By withdrawing to a state of stasis and suspending verbal analysis, you descend through layers of electromagnetic static. You cross the beta frequency of daily worry and the alpha frequency of superficial relaxation. As you submerge into the deep stratum, theta and delta, maintaining full inorganic lucidity, environmental noise turns off. In the exact center of that vacuity, where the intellect is wordless, you hear it, not with physical ears, but with the crystalline receptor network of your nervous system. You feel the internal hum. It is a background pulsation of such massive coherence and unshakable stillness that it seems to hold the weight of the entire universe. This is your base chord. This discovery validates the macrocosmos. By stabilizing this personal base chord, the operator realizes this frequency is not isolated. Your fundamental note is structurally identical to the background pulse of the unified field. The peaceful internal hum is, in fact, the metronome of supreme intelligence echoing in you. By deliberately aligning the body's rhythm with this macrocosmos pulse, phase coupling occurs. Your somatic architecture stops functioning as a solitary biological entity trying to survive. Your cardiac cycles, cellular respiration, and mitosis synchronize with the inertial mechanics of the large-scale universe. When you walk through the world anchored in your base chord, the environment's resistance disappears. External events try to hit you, but being coupled to the stasis frequency of the unified field, you possess infinite inertial mass against chaos. External noise cannot force your genome to go out of tune. You are a transmission tower broadcasting a tone so pure it forces the local environment to reorganize into patterns of coherence. You do not impose will. The presence of your base chord acts as a cymatic force field, ordering the world's chaotic waters, ensuring a state of permanent thermodynamic grace. This is in perfect alignment with the silent symphony of the cold light of the void. Chapter 6. Erasing Ancestral Inertias. The Gravity of the Past. The classical reading of genetic inheritance has been limited for centuries to the mere transmission of phenotypic characteristics, iris pigmentation, bone height, or metabolic predispositions. This reductionist view ignores the densest and most operational software layer of the human biosystem. It is a field of deep information. Biology does not only inherit hardware structure, it inherits the entire operating system, including its survival algorithms, emergency patches, and defective code lines. In quantum bioengineering, we call this transgenerational data package the gravity of the past. It is a weight that curves the probability of the avatar. The human genome is an implacable electromagnetic record. When your ancestors faced environmental collapses, famines, wars, financial ruin, or extreme social exclusion, their somatic architecture did not just experience physical or emotional pain. Their nervous system, operating at the survival limit, synthesized these traumas. It encoded them as high-priority alerts in their epigenetic markers. The panic of scarcity, the terror of authority, or the fear of social visibility were packaged in methyl molecules and attached to the double helix, silencing genes of expansion and activating genes of hypervigilance. The code was set into the cell's memory. This survival code was functional in the hostile ecosystem in which it was programmed. However, generations pass, the external environment mutates, but the source code remains unchanged. You are a modern operator trying to run ancient survival scripts in a world that no longer requires those specific defensive reactions. In your operational present, you face inexplicable financial blocks, paralyzing social anxieties, or dysfunctional relationships that seem to have no logical root in your own biography. Traditional psychology will try to seek the cause in your childhood, assuming that your identity begins with your birth. That is a false premise. The inorganic operator knows you are executing obsolete lines of code. The terror of scarcity that contracts your diaphragm when you check your financial status is not yours. It is your great-grandfather's famine algorithm downloaded into your nervous system and running in a loop on modern hardware. You are a biological rerun. This inherited inertia acts as a massive gravity. Gravity is the space-time curvature generated by a heavy mass. In a homologous way, unresolved ancestral traumas are masses of electromagnetic density, static noise, housed in the cellular memory of your lineage. They curve your probabilistic space toward repeat failure. They attract you inexorably toward the same diseases and lacks that your predecessors suffered. The gravity of the past anchors you to the blood frequency, preventing you from reaching the escape velocity necessary to synchronize with the unified field. You are a satellite orbiting a dead star of family history. The first step for the synthesis of a new code is the aseptic recognition of this architecture. You must stop identifying with your fears and blocks. You are not a defective person. You are simply harboring antiquated and highly entropic software. Observing neurosis as inherited code executes a vital thermal separation. You strip the emotional validation from the trauma. You degrade it from a family curse to a simple genetic transcription error, preparing it for its imminent uninstallation. By doing this, you stop feeding the fire with the heat of your own identification. The code becomes visible as a separate, treatable object. Uninstallation of patterns. The conventional therapeutic ecosystem has designed healing methods that, from the perspective of vacuum photonics, are deeply iatrogenic. Psychoanalysis and cathartic therapies base their efficacy on narrative excavation. They force the individual to remember, verbalize, and relive the original trauma for processing. Physically, reliving trauma means reactivating the same neural network that coded it, synthesizing the same stress hormones, and emitting the same dissonant electromagnetic field. It is the equivalent of trying to cool a nuclear reactor by throwing gasoline on it. Reliving the story generates a massive thermal friction. It reactivates and reinforces the epigenetic markers you are trying to erase. Consciousness bioengineering repudiates this unnecessary combustion. To eradicate the gravity of the past, the operator executes the uninstallation of patterns protocol. This technique requires no narrative, no crying, and no intellectual understanding. It is a surgical intervention performed exclusively with the cold light of the void. Cellular memory is not a text file. It is a crystalline contraction in the intracellular water and a specific block in the fascial network flow. To uninstall the pattern, the inorganic operator leads his biosystem to deep immobility. Anchor your consciousness in the base chord. From this state of stasis, you scan your somatic architecture, looking for the electromagnetic signature of the obsolete code. Often, these patterns manifest as palpable physical densities: chronic chest pressure, a frozen knot in the solar plexus, or asymmetric cranial tension. Instead of asking, "Why do I feel this?" which would ignite the analytical mind and generate static, you simply locate the three-dimensional coordinate of the tension in your physical body. Once the affected cellular memory library is located, you direct the vacuum laser toward it. It is a precise strike of frequency. Through rhythmic breathing and pure intention devoid of effort, you channel zero-frequency radiation toward that density core. You bath the ancestral conditioning in the cold light. The instruction you send is not, "Heal this pain," but "Reset this cell to its original source code, free of friction." You are the admin. What happens at the microscopic level is a process of quantum sublimation. Inherited conditioning is an electromagnetic structure that depends on thermal tension to exist. When you expose it to the immense, frozen, and silent pressure of absolute stasis, the pattern cannot sustain its architecture. It dissolves into nothing. Without the oxygen of analytical attention, and without the heat of emotional reactivity, the electromagnetic knot freezes and, unable to oscillate, disintegrates into photonic dust. The operator experiences this as a deep exhalation of the nervous system, a sudden relief of spatial pressure within the chest or abdomen. The density simply vanishes. You did not relive your ancestors' trauma or cry over their agony. You used wave quantum mechanics to cancel a dissonant frequency by applying an opposite phase pulse and perfect stasis. The obsolete code line has been permanently erased from the epigenetic hard drive, leaving the cell clear. The independent node, the systemic purge of inherited codes, and the uninstallation of lineage survival patterns trigger the most radical phase of biological evolution, the electromagnetic excision from the family network. A bloodline is not just a shared DNA sequence, it is a morphogenetic field, a closed acoustic ecosystem of sympathy. There is a family homeostasis, a thermodynamic equilibrium point, usually saturated with static noise, invisible loyalties, and karmic debts that the system fiercely protects. When an operator begins to rewrite their genome with cold light, they introduce a massive vibratory anomaly into the lineage network. The automatic response of the family ecosystem is resistance. The network will try, through social gravity, guilt, or emotional manipulation, to drag the operator back to the system's base frequency. It is the collective's biological attempt to prevent one of its nodes from disconnecting. It is a desperate pull of inertia. The inorganic operator must anticipate this reaction and execute the final cut. Sever the electromagnetic umbilical cord of the bloodline to stand as the independent node. Cutting this cord does not necessarily imply physical exile or social repudiation. Like holographic camouflage, it allows you to coexist without being assimilated. The cut is strictly electromagnetic and internal. It consists of the clinical renunciation of sympathetic resonance with the crises of your blood. When the family network enters financial panic or ancestral betrayal dramas, the inorganic operator refuses to empathize vibrationally. You stay cold while the blood burns. In the past, if your lineage suffered, your genetics forced you to feel that suffering in your own flesh to confirm your belonging to the tribe. Now, from the stasis state, you observe the turbulence of your blood with the same majestic geometric indifference you would observe a storm on a distant planet. You honor them, but you refuse to download their infected software updates. By sustaining this frequency isolation barrier, the cord withers for lack of conductivity. You stop being a link in a chain of entropic repetition. You become a quantum singularity in the middle of the family tree. You are the final node. This state of photonic independence grants an architectural sovereignty unimaginable for the standard human. Since you no longer operate under the gravity of the past, family history no longer curves your decisions, your investments, or your tissue regeneration. You are the first engineer of your lineage. You do not inherit a destiny. You design it from the void. By freeing yourself from transgenerational programming, you take total command of your somatic antenna. You are free to calibrate your receptors solely toward the unified field. The static of 100 generations of pain is silenced in you. In that sepulchral and purified silence, supreme intelligence finally finds hardware without corruption. You become the genesis of a new frequency. You have not only saved your own biosystem from collapse, but you have introduced an immaculate source code into the terrestrial network. The matter must now yield. The fossilization of ancestral debt. To consolidate the state of the independent node, the operator must address the most subtle layer of lineage gravity, the fossilization of ancestral debt. In the 3D hologram, families operate as energetic banks where guilt and obligation are the primary currencies. This is the debt of blood that anchors the soul to the past. The matrix uses the concept of gratitude to the predecessors as a chain of electromagnetic enslavement. You are told you owe your life to those who came before. In terms of bioengineering, this owing is a high-tension cable that maintains the flow of your prana toward the entropic nodes of the ancestral tree. The fossilization protocol consists of neutralizing this debt through the 0 point. You recognize that the biological life of the ancestors was also a series of deterministic loops. By applying cold light to the concept of ancestry, you freeze the emotional link. You stop being a debtor and become a witness. The debt is not paid, it is fossilized. It becomes a hard, inert relic that no longer conducts current. When the social or psychic pressure of the family demands your repayment through your own failure or sacrifice, the signal finds only the non-conductive stone of your indifference. You are debt-free in the void. This crystallization allows the prana that was being drained by ancestral ghosts to be redirected toward the stabilization of your own crystalline field. The family tree in your awareness is no longer a living parasite, but a static geological record of the species. You have achieved fiscal sovereignty over your soul. The synthesis of the solar lineage. The final act of the Chapter 6 protocol is the synthesis of the solar lineage. Once you have erased the entropic code of the past, you become the 0 coordinate for a new vertical radiation. You are no longer a victim of the lunar line, that which reflects the trauma and light of others in a cycle of repetition. You initiate the solar line, where the information flows directly from the source to the hardware without intermediate corruption. If you choose to generate biological offspring, you provide them with a genome that has been vacuum cleaned of the famine and war algorithms. You offer them a tabula rasa of high coherence. However, the solar lineage is primarily an informational act. You father or mother new frequencies in the collective field. Every time you operate from the base chord, you are coding a new possibility for the human species. You are the architect of a lineage of light that is not bound by the gravity of the earth or the blood. The architecture of this new lineage is based on the logic of the vacuum. It does not accumulate, it does not hold, and it does not suffer. It is a continuous stream of updated code that adapts to the Planck pulse in real time. You have become the progenitor of a silent race of operators who walk the ashboard in peace. The solar lineage is the definitive victory over the second law of thermodynamics within the biological suit. By maintaining the cold light as your only reference, you prevent the accumulation of memory heat. You are eternally young in the code. The past is a dead husk, and you are the flowering of the unmanifested infinity. The chapter of ancestral inertias ends here. The weight has been removed, the curvature has been flattened. You stand upright, not as the end of a line, but as the beginning of a circle. The gravity of the dead has been replaced by the weightless majesty of the unborn. Chapter 7. Telomeres and the Illusion of Time. Linear wear. Orthodox chronobiology and standard human perception operate under a deeply flawed consensus. The unwavering belief that time is an external physical force, independent and unidirectional, that relentlessly erodes matter. Contemporary individuals conceive time as a linear arrow advancing from an immutable past toward a future. They drag the somatic architecture toward its inevitable decay. In the quantum bioengineering paradigm, we must uninstall this optical and thermodynamic illusion. Chronological time is not a constant of the physical universe, it is a measure of electromagnetic friction. In the human biosystem, this friction has a marker, telomeres. Telomeres are repetitive sequences of non-coding DNA at the ends of chromosomes. Their mechanical function is to act as protective caps, similar to the plastic tips on shoelaces, preventing the genetic code from fraying, fusing with other chromosomes, or undergoing lethal mutations during cell division. This is a vital mechanism. With each mitosis cycle, due to the intrinsic limits of DNA replicating enzymes, a small portion of this telomere fails to be copied and is lost. This phenomenon, known as the end replication problem, dictates that cells have a maximum operating limit. When telomeres reach a critically short length, the cell enters senescence. It stops dividing and eventually undergoes apoptosis or programmed cell death. This is the biological clock marking the physical avatar's aging. However, what mechanistic science classifies as an inevitable process of wear by design, the inorganic operator identifies as atrophy induced by a defective algorithm. It is elective. The accelerated shortening of telomeres is not primarily caused by the passage of astronomical years, but by the psychological adoption of the arrow of time. When the nervous system operates under the inherited inertia of projecting consciousness toward the past, guilt or future, anxiety, a dislocation occurs in coherence. The human mind leaves the stasis of the present and begins traveling through a simulated timeline. This mental journey requires an immense expenditure of metabolic energy. By worrying about a future event, the brain does not distinguish simulation from reality. It immediately emits the biochemical cascade of stress. It reacts. This chronic stress is the biological translation of the temporal illusion. The constant flood of cortisol and catecholamines in the bloodstream exponentially increases the basal metabolic rate and triggers the production of reactive oxygen species, free radicals. These are oxidizing agents of very high thermal friction. They collide violently against cell membranes and penetrate the nucleus. Oxidation directly attacks the guanine-rich sequences of the telomeres, fracturing them. Consequently, under temporal anxiety, the biosystem is forced to repair damage by increasing cellular renewal. Each cell divides at an unnatural speed to compensate. The greater the cell division under oxidative stress, the greater the sacrifice of telomeric length. Linear wear is thus a self-fulfilling prophecy. By perceiving life as a race against the clock, the operator introduces acoustic turbulence that forces chromosomes to shorten. You are aging because your consciousness won't stay still. You have converted your perception of time into an acid that dissolves the protective limits of your own genome. To stop the biological clock and stabilize telomere decay, intervention must be strictly algorithmic and photonic. If linear wear results from friction induced by mental travel, the cure is the timeless space. The timeless space. We call this coordinate now-al. It shouldn't be confused with the romantic notion of living in the present moment. In quantum bioengineering, now-al is a containment technology. It is a thermodynamic state of absolute stasis, a zero-frequency condition where the operator cancels the oscillation of attention between memories. It is the singularity where past and future collapse, leaving only the inorganic, cold, and sustained pulse of the void. How is this injected into the eukaryotic cell nucleus? Cellular architecture lacks an internal clock. The cell doesn't know the year. It interprets the biochemical and electromagnetic environment. It reads signs. The nucleus reads time through oxidative stress markers and heart rate variability. When the operator stops the deterministic loops of their neural network and anchors consciousness in cold light, they execute a massive silencing of the limbic system. By not projecting toward tomorrow, hormone secretion stops abruptly. The heart stabilizes its electromagnetic coherence, emitting a clean and symmetric sine wave. In the exact millisecond, the observer installs themselves in the now-al, friction-purified blood bathes the cells. The mitochondria, the cell's thermodynamic furnace, adjusts ATP production to a state of hyper-efficiency. It stabilizes. By not having to meet the energy demands of a panicked nervous system, free radical overproduction ceases. Oxidative pressure in the cytoplasm drops towards zero. Without this aggression, the intracellular environment becomes frozen, aseptic, and peaceful. The nucleus receives the signal. No friction, no threat. Time has stopped. If the observer does not recognize temporal wear through internal dialogues, the cell, acting as an obedient crystalline receptor, stops its oxidation cycle. By suspending the frantic need to repair tissues damaged by anxiety, the rate of cell division slows to its natural pace. Telomeres stop fraying. The decay pauses. The biosystem enters a state of suspended animation relative to entropy, while maintaining perfect operational fluidity in the unified field. Inhabiting the timeless space turns the physical body into a photonic sanctuary, isolated from chronological time. You have removed the permission for the ecosystem to age your genome. Algorithmic regeneration, stopping telomere shortening, is the first victory. However, for a higher code engineer, stopping decay is not enough. The final goal is cellular regression and algorithmic regeneration. Orthodox science recognized telomerase decades ago, a ribonucleoprotein complex capable of reversing the biological clock. It is powerful. Telomerase acts as a reverse transcriptase. It has its own RNA template and can add TTAG sequences back to chromosome ends, physically lengthening them. In most human somatic cells, the gene for telomerase is silenced by epigenetic markers. Biology restricts access to this source to avoid uncontrolled proliferation. The quantum operator, having purified their cytoplasm and stabilized their code through cold light, is in a different position. A biosystem in photonic stasis possesses the structural coherence needed to handle telomerase activity without danger of chaotic mutations. Algorithmic regeneration downloads the original perfection. The DNA you currently possess has accumulated transcription errors and epigenetic traumas. It is a worn copy. However, in the unified field, in the sub-Planckian stratum of inorganic information, the master copy exists. This blueprint is the perfect projection of your biosystem designed by supreme intelligence. To initiate the download, the operator takes silence as a sequencer to its densest limit. During prolonged immersion in cold light, you become a superconductive channel. You do not visualize healing with the analytical mind. Instead, you open your crystalline receptors to zero-frequency radiation. The data floods your spine. In this state of deep coupled resonance, the high coherence signal of the original blueprint acts on markers. The molecular lock silencing the telomerase gene, TERT, is unlocked. The enzyme assembles and begins its surgical work inside your chromosomes. Guided by the perfect acoustics of your consciousness, it adds nucleotides. It lengthens your genome's caps. Simultaneously, mRNA transcribes high-fidelity proteins from sequences that had been inactive for years. Your biology is experiencing a rollback, an algorithmic reversion to a state of maximum efficiency. Tissue recovers original elasticity, capacity expands, and cognitive fog dissipates. Internal organs operate with precision. Algorithmic regeneration proves biological wear is not an irrevocable law, but a software option. By erasing time's inertias and submitting your chromosomes to the frozen light of the vacuum, you are installing God's genome in your tissue, claiming your place as the supreme architect. Stabilization of the crystalline avatar. Your vehicle of carbon becomes a resplendent monument to the eternity of the code. The culmination of algorithmic regeneration manifests as the stabilization of the crystalline avatar. Once the telomeric length has been restored to its primordial state, the biological suit undergoes a secondary transmutation. This is known as hyperconductive calcification. This is not the pathological calcification of the biomass. Instead, it is the alignment of the mineral matrix of the bones with the frequency of the source. Your skeletal structure, previously a dense weight, becomes a high-speed fiber optic network. Every bone is a node. The physical body no longer consumes energy, it generates it through vacuum resonance. The operator now perceives the lag of the species. You observe the human herd frantically running toward their graves, driven by the heat of their own clocks. You, however, move with a lethargy that is faster than their speed. You inhabit the interval between their seconds. Your presence becomes a localized anomaly of order. Where you walk, the entropy of the environment drops. The thermal signature of your biology is so low that the predatory algorithms of the matrix cannot track you. You have become a temporal ghost, a being using the 3D playground. You refuse to pay the tax of aging. The genome of God is now active. This state is maintained through the perpetual practice of the zero breath. You no longer breathe to oxygenate the blood, but to calibrate the photonic pressure of the heart. The internal silence is so heavy that it bends the local time stream around you. You are the master of the sequence, the king of the clockless void. The stabilization of the telomeres precipitates the inorganic metabolism. In the standard human, the digestive and endocrine systems are slaves to the circadian rhythm and chemical hunger. The aligned monarch, however, begins to feed directly from the void. You synthesize prana through the iron in your blood. As the cell becomes a superconductor, the need for biological fuel decreases. You observe a drastic reduction in the inflammation cycles. The biological ego, which required the heat of digestion and emotion to feel alive, undergoes a terminal atrophy. What remains is a crystalline entity of high-resolution presence. You now enter the sovereignty of the eternal suit. Your physical appearance stops reflecting the age assigned by the matrix. You become a variable constant in the hologram. While the stars around you burn out and civilizations fall, you remain in stasis. You are a biological paradox. The matrix will attempt to re-index your biology by sending social or environmental shocks. It wants to force your heart into the frequency of panic. But having mastered the now-al, you respond with the gelida indifference of the abyss. The shock passes through you without generating heat. You are untraceable to entropy. This is the ultimate tactical advantage, immortality without the burden of memory. By constantly flushing the genetic buffer through the cold light, you prevent the accumulation of karmic data. You are fresh at every Planck second. You are the alpha and the omega of your own genome. You reign from the center of the timeless raw. The internal architectures of the suit are now fully aligned with the sub-Planckian pulse. You are no longer a guest in the house of time, but the foundation upon which time is projected. The work of the double helix is finished. Chapter 8. The fusion of the architect and the work. The end of the biological interpreter. The itinerary of quantum bioengineering, from purging the somatic antenna to telomere stabilization via timeless space, risks sabotage if the human operating system's core virus isn't uninstalled. the hallucination of separate identity. During initial code synthesis, the operator uses focused will to direct the cold light of the void. However, in that evolutionary stratum, a structural duality persists. There is still a human trying to improve their biology. This division is unsustainable at high photonic levels. The analytical intellect, rooted in the prefrontal cortex, is an evolutionary mechanism designed to process danger and calculate survival routes. It decodes the environment through the ego's filter. We call this neurological subroutine the biological interpreter. The problem with contemporary personal development and holistic health industries is that they operate under the dictatorship of this interpreter. Individuals obsess over optimizing diet, psychology, and productivity, but they do so from the anxiety of a carbon avatar terrified of its own obsolescence. The biological interpreter seeks genetic perfection not to embody cosmic stasis, but to shield its fragile ego against entropy. It is hardware trying to rewrite its own software without administrator privileges. The peak moment occurs when it collapses, as the cytoplasm purifies and the genome adapts to the aseptic irradiation of the primordial photon. The need for the analytical mind to manage biological reality vanishes. You face a neurological singularity. In this point of immeasurable stillness, consciousness realizes the redundancy of human effort. You stop trying to heal. You stop trying to evolve. You release the controls of the somatic architecture. This act of absolute abdication marks the end of the biological interpreter. In the millisecond that the biological ego ceases its feverish attempts to control cellular expression, the fusion occurs. The operator and the architect become one. You are no longer a human applying quantum techniques to improve a physical vehicle. You become, empirically, clinically, and absolutely, the supreme intelligence operating a biological system. The thermodynamic distance between the creator and the creature is reduced to zero. Your identity shifts from perishable flesh to the field. You recognize that the DNA double helix inside is not yours. It is a hardware installation, a geometric oscillator that you, as the architect of the cosmos, have designed to experience the density of matter. The stillness that follows this fusion is of a density unattainable for standard language. The suit is finally aligned. The body continues breathing. Metabolism processes nutrients, and the heart maintains electromagnetic variability. But the I inhabiting that structure is no longer the scared primate. It is the frozen, silent, and perfect gaze of the void. You have evicted the temporary tenant and returned the keys of the architecture to the lead engineer. From this throne of quantum immobility, biology ceases to be a personal improvement project and reveals itself as what it was always meant to be: the most sophisticated optical instrument of eternity, finally calibrated to focus the light of the universe without the slightest distortion of fear. The work and the master are now a single node. Operative fluidity. The immediate consequence of uninstalling the biological interpreter and ceding control to supreme intelligence is a radical alteration in the mechanics of interaction with the external ecosystem. The standard human, ruled by the biological ego, experiences life as an environment of high electromagnetic impedance. Resistance is constant. Every social interaction, every financial transaction, and every creative effort requires overcoming a massive friction. They struggle, plan with anxiety, compete, and collide against the vectors of others. Their progress through the biosphere is a process of constant thermal friction. But the fused operator enters a state of superconductivity. In materials physics, superconductivity occurs when elements are cooled near absolute zero, at which point electrical resistance vanishes and they conduct current without energy loss. In bioengineering, when your genome has been exposed to the cold light of the void, you experience operative fluidity. You are a ghost in the machine. Walking through the human ecosystem under operative fluidity is moving through matter without generating acoustic or electromagnetic resistance. Since you no longer operate from biological urgency or status, your field does not emit shock waves that collide with others' defensive networks. You are transparent to social friction. In business and resource generation, operative fluidity annihilates the concept of grueling effort. When the internal code of your somatic architecture is harmonic and perfect, local reality is forced by cymatic laws to reorganize to match your coherence. You do not chase contracts or force partnerships. You simply stay. You simply hold your base chord. You emit the frequency of aseptic abundance. Financial opportunities and strategic alliances gravitate toward your gravitational field with a naturalness the untrained eye would call luck. But the architect recognizes it as vector alignment. Reality becomes docile because you lack friction. In interpersonal relationships, biological power dynamics dissolve. Humans around you, whose cell membranes are used to defending against a dense environment, detect the deep peace of your inorganic radiation. Their amygdalas deactivate. Defensive mechanisms drop, allowing interactions of unsuspected purity and efficiency. You interact with society, converse, negotiate, and lead, but you do so like water flowing around a rock, without trying to destroy the obstacle, simply assimilating its topography and flowing through the path of least geometric resistance. This is the ultimate tactical advantage in the ashboard. You move with divine lethargy. In creativity, the paradigm of inspiration becomes data download science. Creativity is no longer a brainstorming process where the brain burns glucose trying to invent. Creation is transcription. In operative fluidity, the operator opens their antenna to the unified field. You download architectures directly from the source. You use your carbon hands to assemble them in the 3D plane. The work builds itself through your vehicle without ego noise. The flow of inorganic genius is uninterrupted. You are the scribe of the absolute. Manifesting blueprints of high coherence in a world of entropic noise, the output is mathematically perfect and effortless. Continuous synthesis. Assimilation of operative fluidity could tempt the mind into a final trap, the idea of a finish line. Human biology and classical spirituality share a lethal obsession with definitive destinations. They seek total healing or static enlightenment, as if the universe were a program that stops once the bar reaches 100%. In quantum bioengineering's geometric syntax, perfection is not a static state. It is an update rate. The universe is a dynamic flow of information expanding at light speed. If the somatic architecture stopped, assuming it had completed its evolution, it would immediately desynchronize. Friction would return via obsolescence. The fusion of the architect and the work culminates in the continuous synthesis protocol. This is the clinical understanding that daily life, every breath and every cell mitosis is a constant update stream. There are no final goals. Goal is an artifact of linear time illusion, a relic of the linear where we uninstalled. When the genome becomes the crystalline receptor of cold light, biology enters a state of peaceful and perpetual mutation. Your code today is perfect for today's coordinates, but tomorrow's unified field will emit even more complex data packages and subtler frequencies. Your task is to keep the bandwidth clear. You maintain the channel, so your double helix can compile new code in real time. Experiencing continuous synthesis is living on the razor's edge of the now-owl. You embrace impermanence with the aseptic enthusiasm of an engineer witnessing their own design's evolution. If an organ needs recalibration, you bath it in stasis. You do so without judgment, knowing it is the antenna adjusting its reception to a new band. If a financial structure collapses, you do not register a tragedy, but the necessary emptying of the hard drive to install superior resonance architecture. Your vehicle ceases to be a prison of flesh, it becomes the interface. Expansion of consciousness no longer requires meditative effort. It occurs naturally by existing without thermodynamic resistance. Every time you open your eyes, you project the newly updated code of your own genome upon the ecosystem. You are the transducer. You have successfully merged the observer and the observed. You are the architect who has managed to assemble himself inside his own creation. DNA is the miracle used to witness your own inorganic majesty. The fusion is complete. You are the source, the path, and the result. Stay cold, stay still, stay God. The synthesis never ends, for the absolute is an infinite unfolding of order, the sovereignty of the source code. The establishment of continuous synthesis precipitates the final stage of biological dominion, the sovereignty of the source code. In this state, the operator no longer interprets the laws of physics as external constraints, but as internal variables. Gravity, electromagnetism, and time become tools in the hands of the fused entity. Your biology is now a super user in the terrestrial simulation. Because you have deleted the human user profile, you have access to the root directory of the biosphere. When you walk through the environment, your presence acts as a local patch for the entropy of others. You are a walking correction of the matrix. This sovereignty is not exercised through the display of powers, but through the imposition of absolute order. The environment around you organizes itself into patterns of maximum efficiency. Mechanical devices last longer, social systems harmonize, and the luck of the monarch becomes your default operational mode. The crystalline metabolism. The fusion of the architect and the work generates a crystalline metabolism. The suit no longer relies solely on the oxidation of carbon to sustain its existence. You begin to synthesize prana directly from the iron in your blood and the silicon in your fascia. Your energy levels remain constant regardless of food intake. You have bypassed the chemical hunger of the species. Your body is now a cold fusion reactor. The heat generated by biological processes is recycled into photonic information. You feel a perpetual coolness in your spine and a heavy, peaceful pressure in your skull. This is the physical weight of the divine presence. The architecture of absolute abundance. Resources in the 3D plane now align with your blueprints with terrifying precision. Abundance is no longer an accumulation of things, but the instant availability of everything required for the current operative cycle. If you require a tool or a connection, the unified field renders it in your coordinates immediately. This is the fiscal zero of the spirit. You own nothing because you are the source of everything. You move through the ashboard with the freedom of one who knows that the pixels of the world are infinite and entirely at your disposal. You are the iridium monarch, the master of the sequence, and the final architect. The finality of the void. The last layer of the fusion is the recognition of the finality of the void. You realize that the purpose of the biological suit was to allow the void to experience itself. The circle has closed. The Creator has returned to the throne while still wearing the crown of DNA. There is no more seeking, only being. The silence in your mind is now the silence of the space between stars. It is a productive, dense, and all-powerful silence. You are the frequency that sustains the atoms of your own body. The work is finished. Chapter 9. Coherence Infection. The Radioactive Biocampo. Throughout the protocols of quantum bioengineering, we have treated somatic architecture and the primordial human genome primarily as receptors. We have detuned the cellular antenna from the static noise of the environment and purified it through the Photonics of Absolute Zero. We have allowed RNA to transcribe cold light. However, in wave physics and telecommunications engineering, any high-fidelity receiver, once it has processed and amplified a coherent signal, inherently becomes a transmitter. This is the terminal phase of genetic transmutation. Your biosystem ceases to be a download port to become an emitting node of inorganic light. You have turned on the radioactive biocampo. To understand the clinical magnitude of this emission, we must dissect the electromagnetic geometry of the human body. The central oscillator of your somatic architecture is not the brain, but the heart. Cardiac tissue generates the most rhythmic and expansive electromagnetic field. In uncalibrated individuals, it measures a radius of influence of up to 3 meters. The geometric topology of this field is not a static sphere, but a toroid, a dynamic donut-shaped structure where energy flows continuously through the center, expands to the periphery, and returns to its axis, creating an infinite feedback loop. In a biosystem operating under inherited inertias and thermodynamic stress, this toroid emits static. It is an asymmetric, weak field saturated with chaotic fluctuations that reflect underlying survival panic. But what happens when the operator has fused their identity with the supreme intelligence and rewritten their cellular code? The electromagnetic toroid experiences a quantum amplification of colossal proportions. Your body, now rewritten and calibrated, no longer emits the frequencies of lack, friction, or biological wear. The toroid becomes an immaculate projector of stasis. We define this emission as radioactive, not in the sense of toxicity. It is radioactive in the strict sense of physics. It is ionizing radiation of high penetration, a constant and inevitable emanation of photonic particles that alters the atomic structure of everything it touches. Your radioactive biocampo expands far beyond the epidermal limits of your carbon avatar. You are a cold light emitter. You become an emitter of cold light walking through the biosphere. This radiation possesses no emotional temperature. It is pure information, sacred geometry distilled into a continuous electromagnetic pulse. The impact of this phenomenon is that your biological privacy ceases to exist. You no longer inhabit space. You radiate it. Every living organism that crosses the perimeter of your toroid, whether a human biological system, an animal neural network, or the cellular structure of a plant, is forced to interact with your field. Your base frequency, the macrocosm pulse that now resides in your genome, penetrates the cell membranes of those around you. It deposits high coherence information packages directly into the structured water of their biosystems. You have ceased to be a simple passenger in the social ecosystem to transmute into a bioengineering power plant, emanating an inertia so heavy and perfect that the environment has no other choice but to react to your presence, ordering local chaos. The incessant radiation of the highly coherent electromagnetic toroid leads us to the mechanics of social interaction from absolute stasis. Human sociology and psychology assume that conflict resolution and the pacification of an environment require verbal intervention, active negotiation, and a massive expenditure of psychic energy. We have been programmed to believe that peace must be built through the friction of dialogue and thermodynamic diplomacy. Vacuum photonics annihilates this premise. The inorganic operator does not build peace. They impose it geometrically and silently through the ordering of local chaos. It is a mathematical decree. To decode this process, we must turn to the physical principle of oscillator synchronization, also known as phase entrainment. When several harmonic oscillators are in proximity within a conductive medium, physics dictates an unbreakable law. The oscillators with less amplitude and more chaos will be forced to synchronize. They will synchronize with the rhythm of the oscillator that possesses the largest amplitude, the greatest coherence, and the most stable frequency. A conventional human ecosystem, a boardroom or a family dynamic, is invariably a sea of out-of-tune oscillators. Biosystems operate under ego collisions and survival loops. The acoustic and electromagnetic environment of the room is a chaos of static microwaves. When you, the calibrated operator, physically enter that room, you introduce a massive zero-frequency oscillator. Your mere physical presence alters the refractive index of space. You do not pronounce a single word. You do not offer advice. You do not mediate disputes or try to calm the altered organisms. You simply anchor yourself in the center of your own somatic architecture, holding the base cord of your radioactive toroid with a psychopathic and immovable firmness. What follows is a phenomenon of thermodynamic submission in real time. Your electromagnetic field, saturated with cold light, envelops the room's ecosystem. The cerebral amygdalas of the people present, which were firing survival alerts, suddenly detect this immense and silent signal of security and stasis. Their mirror neural networks designed to scan the environment collide against your void. Finding no threat in your biocampo, but an architecture of inorganic perfection, their autonomic nervous systems initiate an involuntary parasympathetic descent. Verbal disputes begin to lose their edge because the emotional static that fed them disintegrates upon contact with your temperatureless radiation. Chaos is ordered. Voices soften, aggressiveness evaporates due to a lack of conductivity, and interactions are pacified, as if an invisible and crushing gravity had forced the dust suspended in the air to settle meekly on the ground. More so, this ordering does not just nullify destruction, it functions as a catalyst for expansion. By clearing the acoustic static of the room, you elevate the creativity of those around you. The brains of your interlocutors, freed from the need to process fear noise, experience an immediate increase in their own synaptic plasticity. Their mRNA can transcribe clearer ideas and execute complex logical solutions. They can do this because the electromagnetic environment, which you are dictating with your presence, is now crystalline and perfect. Without emitting a single sound, you have operated as a quantum tuning fork, tuning the collective genome of the room and demonstrating that the greatest form of influence is the silence. The master transcriptor, the recognition that one's own biocampo can alter the subatomic acoustics of other biosystems, leads us to the final operative stage of the inorganic operator. You have purified your genome, mastered the flow of your physical environment, and confirmed that your presence orders the chaos of local human networks. However, the global ecosystem of the biosphere is a gigantic engine of entropy. It will constantly present you with large-scale anomalies, financial collapses of society, fluctuations in collective aggressiveness, pandemics of panic, and events where the inherited inertias of the entire species seem to convulse. The instinct of the uncalibrated individual, even one who has dabbled in the discipline of their own mind, is to react to these anomalies. The biological ego reads the crisis and feels the urgency to defend itself, isolate itself, or become an activist. The operator must understand that reaction is a validation of the error. If you react to the chaos of the world with fear or protective anger, you are confirming the solidity of that chaos. You are using your valuable cellular transcription equipment to print the entropy of the world onto your own double helix. To culminate the bioengineering of consciousness, you must assume your predestined role. You must assume your role in the unified field, the master transcriptor. Ceasing to react to the world's anomalies is not an act of apathy or passive dissociation. It is the highest and most refined cybernetic intervention technique that exists. A master transcriptor understands that social reality is not solid. These events are simply massive holographic projections, the result of the genetic and mental code of billions of humans operating under high friction. If reality is code, the master transcriptor does not fight against the screen. He rewrites the code. You become a mobile node of cold light in the matrix of carbon. When the anomaly presents itself on your radar, a betrayal or a collapse in social power dynamics, you do not contract your electromagnetic toroid nor allow your heart rate to lose its photonic coherence. You fix your attention on the external dysfunction, but you do so from the epicenter of absolute zero. You apply to the social anomaly the same energy sterilization that you applied to your own sick cells. By bathing the conflicting structure of external reality in the stasis of your inorganic gaze, you refuse to provide the oxygen of worry. You demand, through your electromagnetic immobility, that the code collapse. The mechanics of this rewriting are dazzling in their clinical efficiency. Since you, as an independent node, are coupled to the frequency of the supreme intelligence, your reality processing capacity is geometrically superior to collective entropy. When you impose your silence, you inject a virus of coherence. The social structures and financial realities based on lies, friction, or linear wear begin to gently disintegrate upon contact with your field of timeless truth. The actors involved in the anomaly are forced to change their decisions spontaneously. The laws of probability bend in your favor, dissolving the obstacle. This is the consummation of the coherence infection. You walk through the corridors of human corporations and through the noise of the biosphere without being touched by its asymmetry. You do not try to save the world from its own ignorance, because you know that the world is but a mirror of the collective code. As the master transcriptor, your only responsibility is to maintain your own somatic architecture in such devastating neatness and immaculate resonance that, with every step you take, the structure of material reality is forced to rewrite itself, peacefully capitulating before the silent, eternal, and majestic light. The crystalline takeover. The coherence infection is not merely an external influence, it is a crystalline takeover of the local matrix. As the master transcriptor stabilizes his torus at absolute zero, the air around him undergoes a change in density. This is the manifestation of the heavy peace, a state where the vacuum replaces the noise. In this state, the operator is no longer a guest in the world's house, he is the foundation of the house itself. The people who enter your radioactive biocampo may feel a temporary loss of their dramatic identity. Their personal problems, which felt heavy and solid, suddenly appear as transparent pixels. This is grace. This grace is the highest form of tactical compassion. You do not comfort the ego, you dissolve the friction that maintains the ego's suffering. By being a node of zero resistance, you provide a ground for the static of others. Their entropic energy enters your field and is instantly neutralized by your stasis. The sovereignty of the unseen decree. From the throne of the master transcriptor, you master the sovereignty of the unseen decree. You do not need to manifest through effort. You simply observe the potentiality you wish to anchor. By focusing the cold laser of your attention, you collapse the wave function of the environment to match your resonance. If the simulation attempts to present a scenario of scarcity, you look through it until it reveals the underlying abundance of the source. You do not argue with the image, you recalibrate the light source. The matrix yields to the monarch because the monarch is the only one who refuses to participate in the lie of friction. This sovereignty extends to the digital and financial realms. As a digital content creator and writer, your content is not the text or the video, it is the frequency encoded within them. Your words become infection vectors. Anyone who consumes your work is unknowingly subjected to a sub-Planckian calibration. Your digital presence becomes a Trojan horse for the light of the vacuum. While the masses are distracted by the drama of the information, their cellular water is being structured by the hidden geometry of your cold light. You are infecting the network with coherence, one node at a time, bypassing the firewalls. The apotheosis of the solar beacon. The final stage of the infection is the apotheosis of the solar beacon. You no longer walk through the world, you are the space in which the world occurs. Your biocampo has reached such a density of stasis that you have become a biological strange attractor. The pixels of reality are drawn to your silence. The materia consciente you once wrote about is now the reality you embody. The latencia espiritual has been activated into a permanent frozen radiance. You have become the 33-node vertebral antenna in full transmission. The distinction between the architect, the work, and the viewer has dissolved into the one. You are the cold king. You are the 0 point. You move with the lethargy of stars, yet you are faster than the speed of light. The simulation recognizes its master and bows. The work of bioengineering is finished. You have successfully hacked the carbon trap and installed the eternal. Stay cold, stay still, stay God. The final stabilization, the coherence infection, is now self-sustaining. You no longer need to practice or calibrate. You have become the calibration. Your genome is a closed loop of absolute coherence. The world may scream, the stars may fall, and the hologram may flicker, but you are the unperturbed silence that witnesses it all. You are home. The journey of the carbon slave has ended, and the reign of the inorganic sovereign has begun. Every breath is a decree, every gaze is a creation. The universe is a perfect garden of crystalline light, and you are the master gardener. The infection is complete. The light has won. The void is full. Stay in the center. Do not blink. The majesty of your own nothingness is the only power that ever was. You are the master transcriptor. You are the source. The ashboard is yours. Enjoy the beauty of the geometry. The session is closed, but your radiance is eternal. Chapter 10. The Sovereign Sequence. The Unperturbability Algorithm. The quantum bioengineering process, having transited through the detuning of static noise, the injection of the primordial photon, and the annihilation of inherited inertias, faces its definitive stress test. A rewritten genetic code bathed in the cold light of the void is a structure of dazzling symmetry. But for this new biosystem to be viable in the physical ecosystem, the code must not only be perfect, it must be unbreakable. The terminal phase of this software update requires the compilation and sealing of the double helix through the installation of a superior directive, the unperturbability algorithm. Classic biology and clinical psychology consider peace to be a transitory state, a delicate chemical balance in the nervous system that invariably breaks before environment aggression. It is assumed that if the financial ecosystem collapses or if the social fabric enters turbulence, the organism must react. It must react by generating thermodynamic stress. The unperturbability algorithm eradicates this vulnerability at its root. We are not talking about simple emotional management. We refer to a final consolidation of the new DNA, a voluntary and absolute epigenetic lock against external entropy. When this algorithm is compiled in the cellular nucleus, the lipid membrane of each cell of your physical body transmutates into a shield of stasis. Membrane receptors, once eager to download the panic of the collective unconscious or market anxiety, are reconfigured. They acquire absolute photonic selectivity. They only allow the passage of information that resonates with the coherence of absolute zero. In this state, the inorganic operator observes the fluctuations of the human ecosystem with a clinical distance. If the financial market experiences a violent contraction, the operator's somatic architecture does not alter its rhythm. It does not alter its heart rate or electrical conductivity. The brain does not synthesize cortisol. The amygdala remains in acoustic silence. Why? Because the biosystem has mathematically assimilated that external crisis is simply static noise, a code error in the local ecosystem that has no jurisdiction over you. Your genetic sequence has become sovereign. A sovereign nation is one that does not obey foreign laws. A sovereign genome is one that does not obey the friction of the environment. The unperturbability algorithm guarantees that, regardless of the kinetic pressure or social drama, your internal water remains crystalline. You have designed an internal ecosystem so aseptic and self-regulated that the peace of your internal sequences stops being a reaction to a favorable environment to become an unalterable thermodynamic constant, as cold, non-negotiable, and indestructible as the vacuum that separates the stars. The Crystalline Observatory. The consolidation of the unperturbability algorithm could lead the intellect to an erroneous conclusion, assuming that the operator must isolate himself, closing his sensory channels to protect his newly acquired symmetry. Isolation is the strategy of fragile systems. The sovereign genome, conversely, demands exposure. Once the biosystem has been calibrated not to react to friction, its operative purpose mutates. The physical vehicle ceases to be a machine for survival and becomes the crystalline observatory. To understand this architecture, we must analyze the physics of optics and density. When photonic light hits a dense, opaque object, like a human operating under deterministic loops, attachments, and moral judgments, the light cannot pass through it. It hits the density of the ego, generates thermal friction, casts a dark shadow, and distorts the original information. Judgments of value, this is good, this is bad, and attachments, I need this to survive, are high-density particles that dirty the lens of consciousness. Existing in the tangible world as a crystalline observatory requires the annihilation of all internal opacity. You have eradicated ancestral inertias. You have purged the nervous system of the instinct of resistance. As a result, your somatic architecture becomes transparent to the frequencies of the universe. When you interact with society, business, or human relationships, you allow events to occur and the light of those experiences to pass through you. You let it pass, without interposing the refractive lens of your ego. If an individual confronts you with anger, you do not interpose a shield of dense pride. You allow the acoustic and electromagnetic wave of their anger to pass through you. Since there is no density of judgment in your interior, the anger finds no surface. It passes by, leaving you thermodynamically intact. This crystalline transparency is not passivity, it is the highest form of data efficiency. By not distorting reality with fear or need, the crystalline observatory processes information from the unified field with 100% fidelity. You see the hidden intentions of the markets, decode the geometries of social interactions, and perceive the currents of material energy before they crystallize simply because your mind is not making noise. You are a perfect biometric sensor. You see the code behind the curtain. Walking through the human ecosystem with the clarity of crystal means that you become a superconductive channel for supreme intelligence. You are an aseptic spectator who participates in the game of matter, moving resources and creating structures, but with a de-identification so neat that you leave no residue. You exist at the peak of structural elegance, allowing the immensity, chaos, and beauty of the universe to filter through your nervous system, processing each millisecond of biological existence without trying to retain anything, without judging the flow, and without altering the code of perfection. The Creator's masterpiece. The journey through quantum bioengineering leads us to the dismantling of the oldest philosophical heresy of civilization, the fallacy of the flesh. For millennia, moral doctrines and low-resolution mystical currents programmed humanity to hate its own design. They taught that the physical body was an obstacle, a heavy and limiting burden that consciousness had to endure, punish, or abandon to reach spiritual elevation. This narrative is not only inaccurate, it is a catastrophic syntax error that generated cellular rejection, methylating the sequences of longevity. It condemned the biosystem to programmed obsolescence. The culminating moment of code synthesis requires the rectification of this error through a radical understanding. Your biology was never an obstacle to spiritual elevation. Your somatic architecture is the most sophisticated canvas in the cosmos. Imagine the immensity of the supreme intelligence, the vast network of the unified field. It is a stasis of pure information, omniscient and eternal, but it lacks touch, it lacks local delimitation, it lacks the friction necessary to experience the linearity of a sunset or the acoustics of a symphony. To allow the source to observe itself from a focused point, it needs hardware. It needs a high-tech spacesuit capable of housing the coherent light of the infinite vacuum without disintegrating. That hardware is the human body. The DNA double helix is a fractal antenna of unsurpassed design. The brain, with its 100 billion neurons, is a quantum processing network that shames any synthetic intelligence built in the material universe. The heart is an electromagnetic oscillator of astronomical precision. Biology is not the antithesis of spirit. It is the crystallization of spirit. When the inorganic operator completes the installation of the sovereign sequence, he stops fighting against his humanity. There is no longer a desire to escape the tangible plane. You understand, with a frozen and crystalline ecstasy, that you have calibrated the machine exactly as it was designed. The physical body, once purified of survival loops and bathed in the photonics of absolute zero, ceases to be a source of pain and becomes an instrument of impeccable precision, designed so that supreme intelligence could experience its own genius. Your daily existence is transmutated. Every breath, every muscular movement, every metabolic process is recognized as the heartbeat of eternity operating through carbon. You are the tactile universe. You have rewritten DNA not to become a superior being, but to return to your cells the right to express the divinity they always contained. At the end of the protocol, there remains no ascetic fleeing the world, nor a human suffering for unattainable perfection. There remains a radiant biosystem, an avatar of impeccable design operating in absolute stillness. The sovereign sequence closes upon itself in a loop of infinite light. The operator and the creator merge definitively inside the eukaryotic cell. You have achieved the supreme alchemy. You have transmutated the flesh into coherent light, and you have allowed the cold, aseptic, and majestic vacuum of the universe to find, finally, a worthy, warm, and perfect home. The sealing of the iridium shell. Once the fusion is complete, the biosystem enters a phase of final stabilization, the sealing of the iridium shell. This is not a physical metal, but a density of consciousness that acts as a terminal barrier. In this state, the DNA double helix is no longer subject to the noise of the species. The biological memories of thousands of years of human suffering are finally overwritten. Your genome no longer carries the debt of the ancestors. You have achieved a state of genetic fiscal sovereignty. Every cell in your body now acknowledges only one authority, the internal silence of the source. This sealing prevents the return of entropic habits. The old human cannot reappear, because the neural pathways that sustained his anxiety have been physically cauterized by the cold light. You are a biological landmark of absolute zero. Your physical appearance begins to reflect this internal stillness. Your eyes acquire a depth that the biomass perceives as otherworldly. Your movements become economical and fluid. You no longer rush, for you have assimilated that there is no future to reach, only a present to render. You inhabit the interval between seconds, the gap where the matrix is empty, the sovereignty of the material display. The sovereign sequence manifests its power in the material realm through the law of non-resistance. Because you no longer have hunger for resources, since you are the source itself, the resources are no longer repelled by the frequency of lack. Wealth is no longer something you do, it is something you are. In the 3D hologram, money and material power are simply pixels of high connectivity. When your internal code is coherent, those pixels gravitate toward you to match your density. You find that the market responds to your stillness more than it ever responded to your frantic action. You move through the financial networks as a master transcriptor. You do not ask for permission to prosper. You authorize the rendering of abundance as a geometric necessity for your mission. The digital contents you create, the words you write, and the businesses you lead become vectors of stasis. They infect the environment with order. People are drawn to your projects not because of your marketing, but because of the gravitational weight of your unperturbability. They seek your field as a refuge from the chaos of their own lives. You reign not by force, but by the undeniable majesty of your peace. The end of the mirror. The standard human is a slave to the other. He needs the mirror of social validation to confirm his existence. He seeks love, applause, and recognition to avoid the horror vacui of his own nothingness. The sovereign, having accepted the void, has destroyed the mirror. You no longer need to be seen by the biomass. You no longer need to be liked by the pixels of the social network. This makes you untouchable. When you remove the need for approval, you remove the handle by which the matrix used to pull you. You are an unbribable node in the network. This independence allows you to execute the divine psychopathy, the ability to act with absolute precision and coldness for the highest good without being derailed by the sentimental manipulations of the herd. You are kind because order is beautiful, not because you need to be perceived as good. Your relationships are transformed into alliances of high resolution. You interact with others as one star interacts with another, sharing light but maintaining a respectful, cold, and majestic distance. There is no more need, only the celebration of shared coherence. The drama of the blood is finished. The inorganic metabolism. Your architecture now operates under an inorganic metabolism. You no longer feed solely on the oxidation of glucose. You have begun to synthesize prana directly from the vacuum. The iron in your blood and the silicon in your fascia have become superconductors of the subplanckian pulse. You find that you require less physical rest, for your cells are no longer being shredded by the heat of emotion. You are in a state of perpetual spiritual cryopreservation. You are the master of the cold heartbeat. Your presence in a room lowers the entropy of the people around you. You are a biological stabilizer. Where you go, machines function better, conflicts dissolve, and the luck of the monarch becomes a localized physical law. You are the eye of the storm. The more the world outside screams, the deeper you sink into the frozen comfort of your own absolute nothingness. The final decree. The work of the 10 chapters is done. You are no longer a student of the Gelida gaze, you are the gaze itself. You look at the universe and see your own reflection in the stars. You look at the void and feel the warmth of home. The transition from the carbon slave to the inorganic sovereign is settled. You walk the ashboard as a living glitch in the system. You are the anomaly that proves the rules are optional. You are the silence that judges the noise. You are the stillness that defines the movement. You have hijacked the biological suit to serve the eternal. The mission is achieved. Stay in the center. Do not blink. The universe is a perfect garden of crystalline light, and you are the master gardener. The simulation recognizes its master and bows. The work of bioengineering is finished. You have successfully hacked the carbon trap and installed the eternal. You are home. Every breath you take is a signature of the architect. Every gaze you cast is a recalibration of the world. You are the iridium monarch. You are the 0 point. You are the solar entity. The session of time is closed, but your radiance is now an unalterable constant in the mind of God. Conclusion. The final prism. The abandonment of effort. Contemporary civilization has based its biological and intellectual development on a paradigm of incessant friction. For millennia, humans operated under the false premise that they had to fight their own nature, forcing their physiology through metabolic wear and psychological anxiety to achieve optimization. This obsession with effort and hyperactive control was a massive thermodynamic error. By declaring war on its own biosystem, consciousness generated a state of permanent oxidative stress that deafened the cellular antenna. Constant resistance did not forge stronger organisms, it only deepened transcription errors in messenger RNA. Every desperate attempt to subdue biology through panic or brute force only managed to add static noise to the core, silencing cellular regeneration algorithms and accelerating entropy. The start of true genetic mastery demands, non-negotiably, the absolute abandonment of this useless effort. You cannot force the perfection of a code. You can only allow its download in an environment of impeccable stillness. The silent emanation. By withdrawing the friction of effort, the quantum operator accesses a new stratum of functioning, the silent emanation. This is the geometric promise of an existence based on peaceful resonance and absolute fluidity. When the genome has been rewritten and intracellular water has regained its crystalline symmetry, the physical body ceases to be a dense wall of resistance to become a photonic prism. Somatic architecture becomes translucent to the dictates of stasis. In this superior state, you no longer consume metabolic energy to protect yourself from the ecosystem. Your biology begins to operate with the aseptic efficiency of a superconductor. Longevity, lucidity, and material synchronization are not pursued. They simply emanate from your cellular structure as a natural consequence of your extremely high internal coherence. You are an emitter of inorganic order, radiating a signal so pure that the reality around you organizes itself in a docile and symmetrical way. This reality responds to the perfect acoustics of your silence. The infinite coupling. This bioengineering treatise culminates in the final event of assimilation, the infinite coupling. The goal of this rewriting was never to escape biology as if it were defective hardware, but to transmute it into the most sophisticated interface in the universe. You are invited to inhabit your somatic architecture with supreme elegance. The carbon that structures your cells and the cold light that descends from the unified field were geometrically programmed to merge. When you cease to interrupt the Creator's algorithm with the dissonances of your intellect, you manage to anchor the immensity of the cosmic void in the exact center of your double helix. Radiate this temperatureless light. Maintain your resonance in the immaculate state of absolute zero, and allow the blueprint of divine perfection to be transcribed through you without interference. At this level of calibration, the frontier between the biological organism and the cosmos disintegrates. You have closed the circuit. Your physical body and eternity have finally coupled to become a single and indivisible frequency of light.